How dare you sit there and judge me? You are corrupt, incompetent, and frankly, an embarrassment to the legal profession.
There are stories that start with a parking ticket and end with something you didn't expect. This one starts with a young woman who walked into a courthouse in Providence, Rhode Island, looked a judge in the eye and said 3 words that made an entire room go still. Not loud, not shouted, just 3 words, flat and cold, like she meant every syllable. And what happened after that over the next 18 minutes had nothing to do with fines or violations. It had to do with a kind of truth that money has never been able to buy its way out of. I am Frederick, and I cover moments from courtrooms where something real happened. Not just legal procedure, but human beings facing themselves, sometimes for the first time. If that's the kind of story you're here for, hit the like button. It helps more people find this channel. Now, before we get to those 3 words, you need to understand who this young woman was. You need to understand the world she came from, because without that context, she looks like a villain. And she was not simply a villain. She was something more complicated than that. Something that takes a little longer to explain. Victoria Ashford was 23 years old at the time of this hearing. Her father, Marcus Ashford, had built a technology company from nothing into a Silicon Valley empire valued at over $8 billion. Victoria was his only child. She had grown up in a world where doors opened before she reached them, where every mistake disappeared before it had a chance to teach her anything. She had never worked a job. She had never faced a consequence that her father's lawyers couldn't erase before morning. She had never been told no in any way that stuck. She drove a $400,000 Lamborghini with vanity plates that read, without irony, Daddy's $. And she moved through the world with the calm certainty of someone who had never once been held accountable for anything. Not because she was inherently cruel, but because no one had ever cared enough to show her the wall she was heading toward. The violation that brought her to court was, on paper, minor. She had parked that Lamborghini in a disabled parking space outside a luxury boutique. The parking enforcement officer who cited her remained professional throughout the encounter. Victoria did not. She argued, mocked, and eventually tore the ticket up and threw it at the officer's feet. Surveillance footage documented all of it. The contempt in her posture, the eye rolls, the dismissive wave as she walked away without a second glance. She received 3 court summons after that. She ignored all 3, treating them the way most people treat expired coupons. Eventually a warrant was issued, and only then did she appear. She arrived 45 minutes late. Deliberately, it seemed. She parked her car in the judge's reserved space. She entered the building mid-phone call, walked into the courtroom without ending the conversation, and settled into a seat wearing an outfit worth north of $15,000. She brought a coffee from an expensive cafe. She sipped it while the court was called to order. She set it down on the bench beside her like she was at a coffee shop waiting for a friend. From where she sat this entire morning was an inconvenient interruption to her actual life. The courtroom that day was full of people for whom none of this was an inconvenience. It was genuinely stressful. A single mother sat near the front, clutching her purse, worried about a parking ticket she had received while rushing her sick child to the emergency room. She had not been careless, she had been desperate, and the city had still cited her. An elderly man in a worn jacket sat quietly with paperwork for his expired registration, his old car being his only reliable way to reach doctor's appointments and the grocery store. Renewing it had come down to timing and money, and both had run short at the same moment. A college student reviewed notes about a moving violation she had gotten while driving to her part-time job, genuinely afraid that the fine would force her to choose between textbooks and rent that month. These were people for whom $350 had real weight, real calculation behind it. And then there was Victoria, legs crossed, sunglasses still perched on her head like a crown, scrolling her phone with the casual indifference of someone who had never once done that kind of math. The contrast was not subtle. The people around her noticed it immediately. The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees just watching her. Judge Frank Caprio entered the way he always does, without theatrics, without announcement beyond standard protocol, with the quiet kind of authority that doesn't need to perform itself. He has spent over 40 years on the bench in Providence. He is genuinely known, not just locally, but across the internet, for his patience and his humanity. His courtroom has become something people watch voluntarily because of how he handles cases no one else would bother to remember. The struggling grandmother fighting a ticket she didn't understand. The first-time offender who made one honest mistake and showed up terrified. The elderly veteran on a fixed income who needed someone to actually listen rather than just process him. Judge Caprio listens. He always has. He is not soft. Let me be clear about that. He is careful. There is a significant difference between those two things, and this case would make that difference impossible to miss. He looked at the docket, then looked up. "Good morning," he said, addressing Victoria by name. She did not respond. Her eye stayed on her phone. The gallery noticed. The single mother's expression shifted. The elderly man shook his head slowly, recognizing a particular kind of disrespect that he associated with a generation he struggled to understand. The judge waited a beat, then tried again with slightly more weight behind his voice. Victoria glanced up. Her expression suggested mild annoyance, the kind you might direct at a slow elevator in a building you didn't want to be in anyway. She said she was there, asked if they could hurry, mentioned she had an appointment at noon. The words dropped into the room and just sat there, uncollected by anyone. The judge asked her to put the phone away and approach. She sighed, audibly. The kind of sigh that is designed to be heard, designed to communicate that this whole situation is beneath the person producing it. She checked one more message before sliding the phone into her bag, making sure everyone noticed that she was choosing to comply rather than compelled to. She mentioned she was expecting an important call. The judge asked, calmly, whether it was more important than court. She said honestly, yes, it was just a parking ticket, not exactly life or death. I'll sit with that response for a second, because it deserves it. She genuinely believed that. It was not a performance of confidence. She had lived inside a reality where parking tickets were invisible things, where consequences existed theoretically, but never personally, where the word important had always been defined entirely by her own comfort. From inside that worldview, this really was nothing. That part, before everything else, is almost sad. The judge reviewed the citation. He confirmed the details, the disabled parking space, the boutique on Westminster Street. Victoria said she had only been there for 10 minutes, as though duration somehow renegotiated the nature of the violation. The judge explained, patiently and without condescension, that the time did not matter. The space existed for people with mobility challenges who needed closer access to buildings. It was not a courtesy, it was a legal protection for people who needed it. Victoria said no one was using it. The veteran sitting in the second row made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. The gallery stirred. The judge told her those spaces existed for people who needed them, not for people who found them convenient. And then Victoria said the thing that shifted the temperature permanently. She said maybe they should get there faster. The single mother's mouth fell open. The college student flinched as though something had physically landed near her. The veteran began to rise from his seat before his wife placed a gentle hand on his arm and held him there. The judge let the words hang in the air for a long moment, because sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is silence, letting the speaker hear the echo of what they just said. He told her, quietly, that was an exceptionally unkind thing to say. Victoria said she was just being honest, that people were too sensitive these days. The judge's response was measured, without heat. He said honesty without compassion is not a virtue, it is just cruelty with better publicity. That line landed in the room the way certain things land, not loudly, but with weight. You could feel people registering it. He tried a different approach then, asked her about herself, what she did with her time. She said she was rich, asked if that was a crime. He said no, but how you treat people can be. She said she treated people fine. She paid them well. And there it was. Not, I treat them well. She paid them well. The distinction was small in words and enormous in meaning. It told him exactly how she understood other human beings, as a category of people whose goodwill could be purchased, whose care was a transaction, whose presence in her life was fundamentally contractual. The judge noted that the parking officer was a public servant, not her employee, that the people in that courtroom did not work for her. She pushed back with something almost philosophical. Everyone works for someone, she said. The judge listened without arguing, just watched her. He attempted to explain the purpose of disabled parking law, the reasoning behind it, the real people it protected, the genuine hardship it addressed. She interrupted him 3 times inside the first minute, just asked what the fine was, said she had better things to do than stand there getting lectured by someone in a robe. Each interruption pulled a visible reaction from the gallery, head shakes, whispered comments, the collective disapproval building pressure behind a surface that hadn't yet broken. The judge told her she would stay until this was resolved properly. That was not a request. She asked what he would do if she didn't. Held her in contempt? She said it the way you say something you consider a bluff, lightly, with the assumption that the other person doesn't actually have the cards they're holding. He told her to show proper respect for these proceedings. She asked what there was worth respecting, what exactly she owed this room, this robe, this ritual. Tell me honestly, what do you think was actually going through her mind in that moment? Leave a comment below. I want to know whether you read this as performance or whether you think she genuinely believed no one in that room could touch her. The judge's patience at this point was still visible, but it had shifted in quality. It was no longer the patience of someone waiting for understanding to arrive. It was the patience of someone who had already seen what was broken and was deciding how to address it. He told her he was not judging her. He said he was listening to her. And what he was hearing, he said, was someone who had confused wealth with worth, privilege with power, and isolation with independence. 3 confusions, all of them understandable given the life she had been handed, none of them sustainable. Victoria's chin went up. She said he didn't know anything about her. He did though. He had done something she had not anticipated. He had looked at her file, not just as a legal document, but as a record of her life. He knew she was Marcus Ashford's daughter. He knew her mother Christine had died when Victoria was 7 years old, a car accident on Route 95. He knew her father had buried himself in work afterward and left her to be raised by nannies and tutors and household staff who were paid to be present but not permitted to love her the way a parent should. Paid to manage her, not to know her. The colour left her face. He continued. He knew she had been expelled from 2 private schools, that her college admission had been secured by a $2 million donation made during a widely reported admission scandal, that she had accumulated 17 traffic violations in 5 years, and her father's attorneys had erased every single one of them before they could become real. And he said that right now, standing in this courtroom, she was terrified, because for the first time in her adult life, money might not be able to fix what was in front of her. She whispered that none of that was relevant to the case. He said everything about who she was relevant. Because this was not about a parking ticket anymore. It had not been about a parking ticket for the last several minutes. This was about a young woman who was drowning in privilege and did not even know she needed saving. Her eyes began to glisten. Tears formed at the edges. She blinked hard and fast, fighting them, her anger and her vulnerability trading places rapidly across her face. Her voice shook when she finally spoke. She told him he thought he was so wise, analysing her like a case study. She said he didn't know what it was like to be her. He agreed, calmly. He said he did not know what it was like to grow up with unlimited money, but he said he knew what it was like to grow up with love, with boundaries, with parents who cared enough to say no when no needed to be said. And he told her he could see very clearly that she had never had any of those things. The tears came through. She said it wasn't fair. She said he was supposed to fine her and let her go. She wasn't wrong about that, technically. A fine is exactly what the system is designed to produce. You pay it, you leave. The machine processes you and sends you back out into the world as the same person you were when you entered it. In her case, that would have been a failure. A quiet, efficient, procedurally correct failure. The judge told her that if he did exactly that, he would be failing her the same way everyone else had. The teachers who passed her because of her father's donations. The lawyers who made her problems disappear before she ever had to look at them. The people in her life who told her what she wanted to hear instead of what she actually needed to hear. He said he had not spent 40 years on the bench learning how to fail people. She said she didn't understand what he wanted from her. He said he wanted her to understand that she did not own anyone, that wealth was a responsibility, not a weapon, that respect was something you built through how you treated people, not something you purchased with a bank transfer. And he said, most importantly, that she was in pain. Real pain. The kind that had been making her cruel to people who had done nothing to deserve it. She broke then, not in a dramatic, theatrical way, just completely and quietly, the way things break when they have been under pressure for a very long time. She said he didn't know anything about her pain, and then her voice cracked on the last word, and 16 years of armour came apart in a moment. She said she missed her mother every single day. She said she had just wanted her father to notice. She said she had just wanted someone to care. The courtroom went quiet in a different register than it had been quiet before. The single mother, who had spent the better part of the morning looking at Victoria with barely contained frustration, shifted. Her expression moved through several emotions before settling somewhere near recognition. The particular recognition that comes from understanding that pain does not always announce itself politely, that it sometimes arrives wearing a Chanel suit and carrying an $8,000 bag, hiding behind cruelty because it has never been shown another option. The college student wiped at her own eyes. The veteran, who had every legitimate reason to remain angry, sat with his face changed by something older and more patient than anger. He recognized grief when he saw it. He had carried enough of his own. The judge came down from the bench. He moved toward Victoria the way you approach someone who is hurt rather than someone who is hostile. He told her to look at him. She raised her face. Mascara running, composure completely gone. And for what was possibly the first time that entire morning, she actually saw him as a person rather than an obstacle between her and the door. He told her he was not going to fine her a single dollar. Confusion moved across her face. He explained why. Money meant nothing to her. Taking it would produce nothing real. Instead, she would serve 200 hours at the Rhode Island Food Bank, working alongside people who struggled to feed their families, learning from the inside what it meant to serve rather than be served. And she would attend 8 weeks of grief counselling because the wound her mother's death had left had never been properly treated, and she had been bleeding on the people around her for 16 years without knowing that was what was happening. Victoria nodded. She could not speak. The veteran stood one final time. His voice carried none of the heat it had held earlier. He said he volunteered at that food bank every Saturday morning. He said he would be honoured to work alongside her if she would have him. She looked at him, this man she had dismissed, this man whose pain she had mocked with a careless sentence about moving faster, and she asked why he would do that. He said someone had shown him kindness once when he had not earned it. He said he did not think she was a bad person. He thought she was a hurting person who had forgotten how to ask for help, possibly because no one had ever shown her that asking was allowed. She walked toward him. She said she was sorry. She said it without framing, without sarcasm, without performance. He opened his arms. She walked into them and cried the way people cry when they have been carrying something alone for a very long time and have finally, unexpectedly, been given permission to put it down. If this story has stayed with you, if there's something here that felt worth your time, subscribe to Frederick Explains Court. This channel exists precisely for moments like this one, where something genuinely human happened inside a building built for procedure, and it deserves to be told properly. The judge returned to the bench. His eyes were not entirely dry. He did not attempt to hide that. He told Victoria that she had walked in believing her father's wealth gave her power over other people. She was leaving understanding that real power was power over yourself. She had come in broken, angry, and alone. She was leaving with the chance to build something money could not purchase, which was character. Real character, the kind earned through difficulty rather than inherited through accounts. Victoria stood near the back of the courtroom before she left. She paused, turned, and addressed the judge directly. She told him she was sorry for what she had said. She told him he did not work for anyone. He served everyone. And she said that was something she genuinely hoped to learn how to do herself. He said she had just taken the first step. The gallery stood, not because anyone signaled them to, not in performance. People simply rose because something had taken place in that room that felt worth acknowledging. Not her name, not her money, not her father's billions, but the particular courage it requires to be seen honestly and not turn away from what you see. Victoria Ashford walked out of that courthouse a different person than the one who had walked in 45 minutes late, coffee in hand, ready to pay whatever it cost and disappear. She was not fixed. No single morning in any courtroom can accomplish that. But she was cracked open in a necessary way, aware of something she had not been aware of before, starting from somewhere real for possibly the first time in her adult life. The parking ticket was just the door. What was behind it was 16 years of unprocessed grief, a childhood without anyone who loved her enough to say no, and a young woman who had built her entire identity out of armour because softness had never once been safe. Judge Caprio saw all of that within the first few minutes. He saw it before she said those 3 words. And instead of punishing her for the armour, he quietly, methodically, and with complete patience helped her understand she no longer needed it. He did not raise his voice once. He did not need to. He simply refused to let her leave the room as the same person who had entered it. And that, more than any fine, more than any contempt ruling, more than any public humiliation, is what authority looks like when it is actually working the way it was always supposed to.